Today on Cascook's History, where I cook up the go-to meals of historical figures, both famous and infamous, we're eating like Christopher Columbus. A famed explorer and admiral, Columbus set sail with 3 caravels and a crew of roughly 90 men to cross the Atlantic and discover the New World. But how did they stay alive out there? Equipped with a pantry stocked to survive the harsh conditions at sea, Columbus and his men sustained themselves on rations of ship's biscuit, salt meat, salt cod, legumes, oil, vinegar, cheese and wine, stopping off at La Gomera on Thursday the 6th of September 1492 to top up on water, wood and meat. While Columbus likely ate local foods whilst ashore, I'll be focusing on his seafaring diet for this episode. So without further ado, let's spend a day in his shoes through food. For breakfast I'm serving ship's biscuit, aka hardtack, a wedge of manchego cheese, olives, some parma ham and a glass of red wine. A spread like this wouldn't reach the lower deck, but as an admiral, Columbus could dip into his private stores, at least in the first few weeks. The ingredients for the biscuit are basic: flour, water and salt, baked then dried until rock hard to resist mold and time. Museums actually teach you to bake it this way, and period accounts say sailors broke it up and soaked it in whatever liquid was at hand, to soften it up for consumption. The history of the biscuit as sustenance for battle and voyage is a long one. The very word biscuit comes from Latin biscoctus, meaning twice cooked, and there is evidence of soldiers in ancient Rome carrying a hard dry ration called bucellatum, whilst later in the 12th century, Richard the Lionheart set out with ships loaded with biscuit on the Third Crusade. On Spanish ships, such as those helmed by Columbus, biscuits were called bizcocho, or twice baked, and were issued by the sack. Yes, Columbus topped up water, wood, and meat before turning west, but the daily backbone for his crew was this biscuit. It kept for months, it stacked neatly in the bread room, and if they could soften it, it filled them up. Of course, longevity has a price, and that price is weevils. On the worst voyages, the biscuit disintegrated into powder and pests. One of Magellan's men, Antonio Pigafetta, wrote that the crew ate biscuit which was no longer biscuit, but powder of biscuits swarming with worms. I am on board with this breakfast. It's pretty much a mini charcuterie board. I know places in London that will charge you 50 quid for this. Lunch is a simple pot of broad beans and bacon. Think Habas con tocino, because the logic of the galley is calories per cauldron, beans or peas for bulk, pork fat for energy, bay and pepper for aroma, and a dash of vinegar at the end to wake it up. Salt pork would have been used on Columbus's ships, but I'm using unsmoked bacon as a substitute. Now, because today I'm drinking Rioja with all my meals, let's talk wine, accurately. Wine has been made in Rioja since antiquity, and is well attested in the Middle Ages. The earliest written reference is at 873 Cartulary from San Milan de la Cogolla, noting a donation that included vineyards near Treviana. The modern oak-aged Bordeaux-influenced Rioja that defines the DOC arose much later in the mid-19th century, with pioneers like Marqués de Murrieta and Marqués de Riscal. So in 1492, you'd be drinking rustic local table wine, not today's long-aged Rioja. A wine ration was standard in Spanish fleets. The cultural contrast is famous. Spaniards with wine and olive oil, English with beer and herrings. For long crossings, victual lists show bizcocho, salt meat, bacalao, rice, habas, oil, vinegar, dried fruit, and wine, measured out daily, sometimes approaching 3/4 of a litre per man. Because ports in Andalusia stocked so many expeditions, a lot of shipboard wine would have been local. Many later sources place sherry squarely in the seafaring pipeline. Columbus is often said to have carried it. Either way, austere table wine in a wooden cask is the historical safe picture, not 21st century Rioja Reserva. I really like this. Simple, meaty, a touch oily, with that earthy bean comfort and a sharp little tang from the vinegar. The hardtack had to be soaked, or my teeth were in real danger. Then a good glass of wine to wash it all down. Dinner is the bowl the Spanish world kept circling back to: potaje de garbanzos con bacalao, chickpeas with cod. Onion and garlic softened in oil, bay and pepper for warmth, chickpeas with their cooking liquor, then desalted cod slipped in just long enough to flake. Some of the chickpeas are mashed up to thicken up the liquid, a splash of vinegar is added for balance, and hardtack is served on the side for dunking. Two preservation traditions meet here. In the far north, people made stockfish, unsalted cod air-dried in the cold for centuries, with medieval accounts noting it kept for years. In the later 15th and 16th centuries, heavily salted cod rose with Atlantic fisheries and Iberian demand. It travelled better in warmer climates than plain dried fish. That's how bacalao became an Iberian staple, especially useful across dozens of Catholic fasting days when meat was off the table. By the mid-16th century, the Basques were a major player in the Newfoundland grounds, and cod had already become a basic food in ports like Bilbao. The wider international fishery is counted in hundreds of vessels by the 1570s. You don't need that scale for 1492, but it shows why salt cod dominated Iberian kettles for centuries afterward. Bacalao is still a backbone dish from Portugal to the Caribbean, but note the tomato-rich, olive-laden versions are later evolutions. Probably my least favourite of the day. The crushed chickpeas didn't do much to thicken this. I'm not a big fan of fish soup in general, but I have had nearly a full bottle of wine, so who cares? That's a day on the Atlantic in 1492. Hardtack, a bean and pork pot, and chickpeas with salt cod, with a wine ration to drink, or to soften the biscuit when your teeth surrendered. If it feels austere, that's the point. This food wasn't designed for indulgence, it was designed to endure. Alright, for the ratings. Flavour will go over 6. Breakfast was really good, but it slowly went downhill from there. Authenticity is probably an 8. The wine choice could have been a touch more accurate. Besides that, all the dishes were made with ingredients found on deck, so yeah. If you want to recreate any of the dishes seen in this video, head over to my website for the full recipes, link in the description.